You're listening to episode 101 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Julian Adkins, Anantacitta Tunnell, and Nourie join us to talk about a new website dedicated to growing the secular Buddhist community in the UK. Every week, I get email from listeners to the podcast and from people who have found the Secular Buddhist Association site. Take this one from Michael R. just the other day. I would like to take a moment to thank you for developing and establishing your website. It fulfills a need I've long attempted to satisfy. My interest and practice of Buddhism is strongly oriented along the same lines of what I perceive to be those of John Peacock's, Stephen Batchelor's, and Steve Hagen's. However, it was not until I encountered your site that I realized there was a community that appeared to resonate for me. Anyway, I wish merely to express my gratitude and look forward to the SBA's continued growth. Thank you, Michael, and everyone else who writes in. We appreciate your involvement, your ideas, your stories and suggestions, and are very grateful that you're finding value in this community-building effort. We're only just beginning, and in the next few years, we're going to see some amazing and exciting things. One of the challenges we face is that our practice is about dissatisfaction, its causes and conditions. As the listeners here know, that takes effort, an honest and sometimes hard look at our minds and why we do the things we do. Forgive the pun, but the value of this premeditated effort is a difficult message to convey, in part because people don't want to hear that there's work to do. An example I posted on the Facebook page demonstrates this. As of this recording, we have a comfortable number over 2,000 likes on Facebook. In contrast, the Facebook page for The Secret, a book and even DVD about using wishful thinking to get what you want, has well over 2 million likes. Being told it's easy, and that you are your own wish-fulfilling gem, is very appealing. So I ask that if you're finding value in the podcast, head over to iTunes and write a review, or just simply rate it. If you like what you see on the websites, tell others. So many people would also find value in this approach to the teaching and practice, if we just let them know. Today's episode is about just that. The growing of the online and now face-to-face secular Buddhist community. Julian Adkins describes himself as having had several incarnations, all very much in this lifetime. He has taken the role of a professional classical ballet dancer, water engineer, design draftsman, and registered nurse, but now realizes these are merely activities and not identities. The beginning of this minor realization came 10 years ago when he first began learning about and engaging with Buddhist meditation practices. He is a founding member of the Edinburgh Secular Sangha, a grassroots community in Scotland committed to creating secular naturalistic expressions of the Dharma. As well as Dharma practice evenings, the Secular Sangha also runs practice evenings devoted to mindfulness-based stress reduction and cognitive therapy. However, Julian is passionate about engaging with the Dharma as a way of life that includes every dimension of the Eightfold Path as well as therapy. Anantacitta Tunnell has been a Buddhist since 1992 and was ordained in 2002. He trained in a Western Buddhist tradition, but felt frustrated and constrained. He started reading some of Stephen Batchelor's books and found them refreshing and liberating, and so went on some retreats led by Stephen and his wife Martine. Anantacitta is now a secular Buddhist as a result. Along with his wife Marcella, he lives in Birmingham, England, and works as a social worker. Anantacitta also teaches meditation to beginners in a local complementary health clinic, and he supports the Birmingham Secular Meditation Practitioners Group. Dana Nourie does not label herself as a Buddhist, though she does practice Buddha's teaching and associates with secular Buddhists. She has been a guest on the Secular Buddhist podcast many times and has been the primary blogger on the Secular Buddhist blog. Dana is also the technical director of the Secular Buddhist Association. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Earl Grey. We are talking about secular Buddhism in the UK, after all. And our guests today are Julian Adkins.
Hello.
And Dana Nourie.
Hello from sunny California.
And Anantacitta Tunnell.
Hello there.
Today we're here to talk about a new site, and I'm very, very excited about this. Our friends in the UK have started a secular Buddhist site, and it will be serving the community in the UK. And before we go into the depths of that site and the wonderful things that are on it, I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to hear the stories of our guests today. And so, Julian, what I'd like to do is start with you. You and I have chatted about this before many times in our conversations, but I'd like you to share with the audience what your encounters and your progress with this practice has been, and in particular, what's made you passionate about a secular approach.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I suppose it's probably important to say that I grew up in a fairly nominally Anglican Christian household, and became a committed Christian at the age of 19. And that has subsequently had a deep influence on my life. I didn't remain a committed Christian for longer than 2 or 3 years, but it had a huge impact on the direction that my life has subsequently taken. So at the time I was living in London, I was training to be a classical ballet dancer, and I can't remember the exact thing that precipitated making that commitment to Christianity, but I went on to work professionally as a ballet dancer for a couple of years, and then found or felt that it wasn't what God wanted me to do with my life.
Which is a shame, because I've heard the good Lord is big on ballet.
Yeah. and you know, in fairness to the Christians that I was hanging out with at the time, that pressure wasn't coming from anybody that I was worshipping with or doing Bible study groups with. I guess I just felt a kind of calling, I guess you'd call it. Felt that when I read the Bible, Jesus was particularly concerned about the poor and disadvantaged, and I felt that classical ballet is quite a rarefied art form, or at least it can be. I mean, it's becoming far more accessible now. And I wanted to do something practical, so I went off to train as an engineer with the hope that that would give me a skill ticket to go and do some work, overseas aid work with the church. But by the time I'd finished my training, my degree, I'd lost my faith. So I was left quite kind of rudderless, really. With my faith, I lost an awful lot of self-confidence as well as direction, actually. And I did go on to realize my dream to a certain extent, because I went to serve overseas with a voluntary organization, voluntary service overseas, which is kind of often seen as the UK equivalent to Peace Corps in the States, I think. And that didn't work out quite as well as I'd hoped it would, as I was evacuated from the country in which I was serving. There was a civilian coup. So I wound up back in the UK without, without any real sense of direction. And I kind of just drifted along, really. I drifted back into the UK water industry, which, well, it's a perfectly respectable place to be. It wasn't something I had any great passion for. And as I said, I think my confidence had taken a big knocking, both as a result of losing my faith and also as a result of my career really not working out as well as I'd hoped. And I just progressively drank more throughout my 20s to kind of deal with that in some way, although I didn't suppose for a minute that was a good solution. And eventually I turned to Alcoholics Anonymous for help when I was, it was about 11 years ago now. And I found that was a great environment, actually, on a spiritual level, because there wasn't any requirement to believe in God per se, and yet there is obviously this idea of a higher power and kind of thing. And it gave me the space to kind of really start exploring my sense of spirituality again. And it was within the first year of being in Alcoholics Anonymous that I was introduced to the Dharma. So a friend of mine suggested that I'd appreciate a weekend away with what was then the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, learning basic meditation practices. And that was my first exposure to Buddhism, really. A lot's happened since then. My Dharma practice has become more important to me, really, than my involvement with AA. In fact, I no longer go to AA meetings these days. It's one of the reasons I feel sort of at liberty to kind of talk without sort of worrying too much about anonymity, because it's a bit of a complicated one, because technically speaking, on a podcast about AA is speaking at the level of press and media. So it's probably considered to be a bit of a no-no. But I hope that I'm not betraying my friends in AA by speaking openly about the organisation. I think the thing to emphasise is that I don't represent the organisation in any way.
Yeah, I think you're actually okay in that, because we've had other interviews, notably with Kevin Griffin, who is a fellow who's written a book about his experiences with a Buddhist approach to 12-step programs. And for folks who are listening, who either this is a challenge you have yourself, or it's someone that you know or love has this same struggle, there are many wonderful programs available that are occurring through groups like Against the Stream, and even our local Zen Center here in Minnesota has 12-step programs available to them. So I don't want anyone listening to this to feel that there isn't help available, because there is. And a lot of what is effective in that is just the mutual support of a community. So don't hold back. If you need help, or there's someone that you know that would benefit from it, check into it. You're not locked into a specific 12-step program. There are other options available to you. Absolutely.
I found that your interview with Noah Levine was interesting on that front as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've progressively over the last 10 years become more atheistic and more secular in my outlook, and yet at the same time I'd say that I've not lost any of my religious sensibilities, I suppose. In fact, I've got a deeper appreciation for probably even Christianity than I did when I first lost my faith, and just I'm very comfortable having my practice rooted in traditions which have historically been shot through with metaphysics and supernaturalism and other propositions that many of us reject now. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a real danger that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think this project of secular Buddhism, and how do you benefit from the last 2,500 years of wisdom in this amazing tradition, without feeling that you have to buy into the cultural dimensions of it that are associated with particular beliefs.
Julian, you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to ask about. You said that at one point you had essentially lost your faith. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, if there was a progression to that point, or was there an event that occurred? What was it that made you, that had helped you arrive at the point of being, oh, I don't have that kind of faith anymore. That's not a part of my life.
Sure. I think when one looks back over life, certainly when I look back over my life, certain moments of epiphany stand out. But in reality, I suspect that life is much more processual than that. And when I became a Christian, I obviously remember the nights that I prayed with a friend of the family, actually it was. And that will stick in my mind probably until the day I die. But of course, there was a lot went on in the lead up to that evening. I'd been exploring the whole idea. I'd been playing with it in my mind. I was aware that I was drawn to Christianity because the people that I met in the church seemed to be genuine. They seemed to be happy. They seemed to have something that I wanted. And so that was a process, and it culminated in a prayer. The losing my faith, likewise, was a process. And I remember the pain, actually, of standing in a car park with my pastor and telling him that I was leaving the group. And actually, I remember that as being far more devastating in a way than any loss of a particular belief. It was that moment where I essentially felt like I betrayed my friend and my pastor and said, you know what, I've been one of your right-hand men for the last 2 years with this group and I'm leaving. But what led up to that process actually, led up to that point, the process that led up to that point, I think was, ironically, becoming more involved with evangelism. And I was... I sound a bit big-headed to say this, but I used to pride myself on being quite good at it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So to the extent that if I was given a section of the halls of residence where I was staying to evangelize and do door knocking, I was always dismayed if someone else did part of my section because they never got as good results as I did. Because it was... the way that I would engage people was to really just sort of ask them about the assumptions they had about about life in general, and what certainty they, how could they be sure that those assumptions were correct. And in the course of inviting people into the room to do these kind of Bible studies and inquiry sessions and so on, I felt that I had to be, in order to be genuine, in order to be honest, I had to challenge and question my own assumptions just as deeply. And to be really honest in a process like that, you have to be open to outcome. And the outcome wasn't that ultimately all the people in my group became Christians. The outcome was that I questioned my own faith and thought, hang on a minute, this isn't adding up. This doesn't make sense to me. I've got a problem with this, and this. And I think those problems have probably always been there. But when I became a Christian, I was encouraged to shelve those intellectual problems or questions, take a leap of faith. And I kind of figured that if I was a good Christian, if I did this, if I threw myself into a relationship with Jesus, then eventually all these other bits of the jigsaw puzzle would slot into place. And ultimately, I began to realize that, you know what, they weren't slotting into place. It still didn't make any sense to me. And so ultimately, I ended up becoming aware that it was really the group that I was in that was sustaining my faith. I had faith in the people around me more than in God. And I actually remember saying to my pastor, I feel like I'm stuck in this kind of Christian subculture, and I actually need to step outside it in order to get a clearer view of my own life. And sure enough, as soon as I stepped outside of that subculture, everything just collapsed, which was very traumatic for me. But ultimately, I'm very glad that I did that, because without that, there wouldn't be the authenticity in my life that there is now. So, yeah, it's turned out okay now, and obviously we'll see what the future holds. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that story.
You're welcome.
Anantacitta, if you would also tell us a bit about your background and how you came to the place where you are now.
Okay. Well, actually, it's not that dissimilar to Julian's, really. My parents were Christian missionaries who worked actually out in India. My father was a doctor, and I suppose that Christianity was always a big part of my family's life, going back to my grandparents. So I guess I kind of was part of the church as a sort of family thing rather than any personal commitment myself. Although in my early 20s I did try and, I suppose, take a more proactive, more sort of Christian sort of. Well, I went to one of Billy Graham's big talks down in London, and I think it never I don't think Christianity ever really clicked with me. I think the major stumbling block is that I just didn't believe in God.
That could present a problem, yes.
Yeah.
Be a Christian, yes, it would be rather difficult. So really, I guess in my 30s, I decided to go back to university. I was never very good at school because I had dyslexia, and that wasn't really identified.
Yeah.
So I went back in my 30s to do a degree in sociology. And during that time, we did a lot of discussions on Western philosophy, Hobbes, all sort of big major Western philosophers, Socrates, but very little on Eastern philosophy. So I started thinking, I thought, well, I'd quite like to just look at Eastern philosophy. So I picked up a book on Buddhism, and it was really, it just clicked with me, basically. It just felt right for me. So nothing really happened until well after my degree. My first marriage went rather wobbly, and I felt, I don't know, I felt I needed some direction. I didn't feel Christianity was for me. A friend of mine took me to a small Buddhist temple up in Wireless, Northumberland, which is right in the northeast of England. And I just found it incredibly warm and exciting and calming, and it was just wonderful to be there. And I did go up a few times. I actually spent a couple of days there once with the monks. I think the thing with, because it was a Theravadan monastic setup, didn't really click with me. I think it felt like going back to the old sort of Christian thing where, it was a religion where certain things were expected, the hierarchy. Monks were kind of, doing it really, and the lay people were supporting that kind of thing. And I thought, well, that really isn't for me. I didn't really want to be a monk particularly. And then I picked up a book written by Alex Kennedy, who is actually Subhuti, was one of sort of the quite senior members of the FWBO. And I read that, and it felt less alien to me. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. It was traditional Buddhist, but with a Western voice, which did kind of click with me better, I think. So I did get quite heavily involved. 1992, and then I was ordained into the Western Buddhist Order in 2002. So it's about 10 years involved. But I think, like a lot of organizations, religious organizations, for me, it started to be unhelpful, I think, for me. I'm certainly not criticizing the FWO. I think if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be a Buddhist today, and they kind of taught me an awful lot. However, I felt quite constrained by the FWO. I wanted to explore my own practice. I didn't feel the need for some sort of leader or priest or vicar or minister. I felt that I needed to explore my own path. So I think a great deal of it was that, I think. So I left the FWO in about 2005. So really I was only ordained for 3 years. And then basically since then, I was sort of, I don't know, looking around to see what was there, read Stephen Batchelor's Buddhism Without Beliefs, and was really taken by that. It really resonated with me. And I went on a few retreats with Stephen. And we kind of had a Skype chat on a regular basis. And during one of those chats, he said, you're aware of secular Buddhism. I said yes, and I would actually call myself a secular Buddhist. And what he suggested was starting something up in the UK. Because obviously you, Ted, had started something up in the United States. So, he felt it might be useful to start something up in the UK. And that's sort of where it's all started, I suppose. So I'll end where I started.
Excellent. Dana, now the listeners have heard about your background, but I was wondering what your thoughts are about these two backgrounds you've just heard. What are some things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I find both of them really fascinating because I had dropped Christianity at such a young age. I was only 10. But I also was dyslexic and had the same problems in school. And what attracted me to Buddhism initially is that it's so focused on self-learning and self-exploration. And I found in the Mahayana Tibetan tradition that there was too much leading, and it felt very churchy for me. So I could relate to that as well. And that the secular Buddhism just fit really well for me because of the practice that's on our own, but there is also the community when you need it, So both of these histories were really fascinating to me, especially the parts concerning Christianity. And it's just really interesting to me because my background is very different than that.
Now, for me, something that resonated a great deal because my own background was fairly atheist agnostic from the very beginning. There wasn't really any loss of an existing traditional background. For me, what resonated with Buddhist practice was that it is based more so on one's own actions, and there wasn't a need for faith. One can, of course, have a faith-based approach, but one doesn't have to, and that's where the secular part for me resonates most, and I think that's probably one of the challenges we all face, is that there still seems to be a misapprehension that a secular Buddhist practice is in conflict with traditional, rather than simply being another approach. And I see this. I have the winter 2011 issue of Tricycle in my hands right now, and there's an article here, and there's a quote I'm going to read to you. This is on page 52 for those of you at home following along. The idea that one can just do the practice is itself based on faith. Yet as easy to miss this sleight of hand. This view of practice does not avoid faith. It simply plays into faith we already have. That is, faith in a technological approach to life. And the thing that I struggle with in that approach is that I've heard the phrase, it takes faith just to get up in the morning, and this use of the word faith is not really why and how I'm engaging with this. There's curiosity, and then there was confidence.
Confidence, I think, is what I would use instead of faith.
Yeah, because faith, and I think this is probably something in particular for us who have a cultural Judeo-Christian background, even if we were not practicing the religions of a Judeo-Christian background, is that faith has its own connotations of accepting things for which we don't necessarily have a chain of evidence to show why things are occurring this way. So that's one of the things, for me, that resonates with a more secular approach. Julian, what has that been something that you've encountered as well, I imagine, with some of your background?
Absolutely. And I think this is where one of the areas in which Jon Kabat-Zinn has excelled with his mindfulness-based stress reduction approach is he has these kind of 7 foundational attitudes that one brings to mindfulness practice, and one of them is trust. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't he steers clear of the word faith. I mean, any reading of those 7 foundations, you can see that they've drawn from the Buddhist traditions, which inspired his clinical approach. But he has been quite careful about how he's translated them and put them across, because we do tend to just lay ideas over our Judeo-Christian culture and interpret them that way, which is not always helpful.
Right, and I wonder too if that word faith came into Buddhism through the Christian interpretations of Buddhism, because historically it was Christians who were interpreting the Pali, and I just kind of wonder if they were seeing it still through the filters of their own religion.
That's one of the points that John Peacock made in our conversation or interview with him, is that is exactly the case, that they were seeing it with the template, as we all do. I approach the Dhamma with the background of someone who's trained in the hard sciences. My degree's in biology, and I come from a skeptical background, so that's how I engage with the Dhamma, and it's shown itself to be wonderfully meaningful and helpful. Others don't, and Julian, I'm glad you brought up the MBSR, the Jon Kabat-Zinn efforts, because in that same article in Tricycle on another page, the person says techniques, and they're referring to therapy kinds of techniques, are at best secondary and can in fact constitute a danger. I don't resonate so much with that. I think it's just an opportunity for people who need help to get it, and to call it dangerous is to try to ward people off from this demonstrably beneficial practice in a way in which they can engage with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that MBSR is wonderful, and it's making these practices accessible to huge numbers of people, which is extremely important. I understand the sentiment that MBSR is not the entirety of the Dharma.
And I would agree with that. It's
yeah.
very, of course.
Or a mental therapy, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's not how Jon Kabat-Zinn and his colleagues are selling it anyway.
Right.
And the community that I'm involved in here in Edinburgh has actually got sort of a twofold approach to our social organisation, our meetings, in that on one week we will have an evening devoted exclusively to the practices found in MBSR and related therapies. And on the alternate weeks, we will explore the Buddha Dharma and practices and models and phenomenology and philosophy and such like that you find in the traditions that have inspired these Western psychological interventions. And having that balance allows people who just want the one thing to come along to those evenings that focus on those things, and those who want to explore the wider traditions to come along to the other meetings. That seems to be working out very well, actually.
Julian, tell us a little bit more about that group, because that is one of the things I wanted to make sure listeners had a chance to hear about.
Sure. I mean, my relationship with sanghas has been kind of I got a bit frustrated, a bit disaffected, I suppose, around about 2005, which is kind of around about the time that Anantacitta was parting ways with the FWPO, I think he just mentioned. And around about that time, I too was attending community sanghas less and less. I was involved in an FWPO sangha here in Edinburgh for a few years, and I just became more and more uncomfortable with some of the concerns that Anantacitta voiced, actually. And I really survived for a number of years on retreats with Stephen and Martine at Gaia House, and meeting up with friends of a like mind to meditate on a Saturday morning in each other's flats. And I was always hoping for something a little bit more substantial than that. And as time went by, my various friends moved away from Edinburgh for personal reasons to go to jobs and such like, and I was left pretty much without community. And I started going along to humanist groups, which I got a huge amount from, but they don't have quite, well, certainly the Edinburgh group doesn't have much interest, or any interest really, in sort of methods of personal transformation.
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because I'm going to segue just for a moment, that I had just done, and Dana posted on the SBA website, an interview I did with my friend Scott Lohman for their website, which is a secular humanist group here in Minnesota. And what we're seeing is an increase in that interest on secular humanists in having more of a practice. I have an interview this afternoon. This is an episode that will probably be coming up after this one, or perhaps already at this point, not quite sure when it's going to fall out, with Rick Heller, who combined their secular humanist contemplative group at Harvard, the Harvard chaplaincy is what they run through, with the Cambridge Somerville Secular Buddhist Meetup group that started based on interviews that initiated with this podcast. So we are seeing great interest in that. And Dana, you also took a look at their website.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot more combining of humanists and secular Buddhists as well as atheists, because I think a lot of people do relate to the mindfulness that they hear about, and they really don't know how to go about doing it. They want to refine their minds. They want to learn critical thinking. And I think folks are catching on that secular Buddhism is a good place to learn all of that. We have methods.
Anantacitta, your own background and seeing this trajectory in your own life and your own progress with you've actually gotten to a point where you're I think right now you're in the middle of doing a Buddhist meditation course that you've labeled secular Buddhist meditation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. I've done a few beginners meditation classes in the past. And what's really been interesting is that the people have had an interest in meditation, but not necessarily in Buddhism. And a lot of that is that Buddhism to the Western mind is somewhat alien. And though they, it's interesting to hear what Julian was saying about sort of the therapeutic about therapeutic meditation practice, because I think that's what people want. They want some sort of therapeutic um, meditation, which will make them feel better. I, I, I kind of steered away from that because I'm not, although I think meditation does have therapeutic value, I think it's more than that. And what I try to do is I try and sort of say, well, you know, regular Buddhist meditation practice with ethics and wisdom is a far more sustainable thing to do rather than just learn meditation. So I try and sort of combine those all together. And I've done quite well, really. I've done 9 up to now, 2 under the auspices of secular Buddhism. I think it's gone down much better. I think people are much more responsive to it. And I also run a meditation, a regular meditation group as well, here in Birmingham, West Midlands, as well. And that's slow to pick up, but I think we're getting there.
That sounds great. Yeah, and Buddhist meditation, we discovered that there is more than just the need to be happy. There's much more to look at in our life experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that this is what I see, and you may have different opinions. There are going to be several opinions on this. That's the distinguishing factor, and why I started this as the secular Buddhist rather than a secular humanist or secular contemplative studies or something like that, is that we're not disparaging therapeutic applications. Far from it. We're very actively supporting those. Those are wonderful and very useful. What we're saying is that we have found in our own experiences that there is even more that can positively help transform our lives in a beneficial way, and that is more rooted in a what we have traditionally called a Buddhist practice, and we're still rooted in that. We haven't got a different kind of term for it, but that's one reason I wanted to respect that background and those roots. Now, we may see that evolve, and I expect we will see that evolve over time, and we're already seeing it with things like various contemplative studies and various contemplative conferences that are occurring every year, and more are starting up, and we're seeing things with the secular humanist groups like what Rick is working on. So we're seeing the evolution now.
I'm really pleased to hear you voicing that commitment, because it's something that's come up in the evolution of our little group here in Edinburgh. What happened off the back of those humanist meetings that I was attending is that I ended up challenging the group essentially, and there was some interested in the publication of Stephen Batchelor's book, Confession of a Buddhist Atheist. And I did an interview with Stephen and published that in the Humanist magazine, the national magazine here in Scotland. And that then led on to a talk that I gave to our local group, during which I challenged them about this kind of more, if you like, subjective dimension of life and kind of personal transformation, etc. I kind of said, humanists haven't really got anything like that here in Edinburgh. So I kind of challenged myself in a way and said, well, look, who would be interested in setting something up? Would anyone like to come along and explore these ideas? And a few people did. And we started off with a very open format. In fact, it was called Open Mind. But in a way, we ran into trouble quite quickly, because it didn't have enough structure. I wanted to avoid the B word in terms of Buddhism, because I knew that it would switch a lot of people off. But what ultimately came out of that was that there wasn't enough structure to the group. There were plenty of people in the group who didn't really have any prior experience of meditation practices, or any forms of kind of subjective inquiry, really. So they asked me to do an introductory course. So I did do a kind of an 8-week course based on John Kabat-Zinn's type approach. And when we came towards the end of that, the group was really beginning to gel. and they wanted to keep going. And at that point, I actually was on retreat with Stephen at the end of that 8-week period, and I took the opportunity to talk to him about how things were going, and I kind of voiced my kind of disappointment or frustration, I suppose, with exactly what you're saying, that I wanted to explore the Dharma in its fullest expression, not just therapy, as fantastic as that is. And so I kind of said to the group, well, look, I set the group up, but this isn't my baby anymore. This is taken on a life of its own. You guys take it forward into whatever you want it to be. Personally, because I've got this interest in the Dharma and Buddhism, unless it's going to have that kind of dimension to it, then I'm probably not going to be spending lots of time writing emails, booking rooms, getting the money together, doing all the organisation, because if I'm going to be doing all that in my spare time, it has to be something that really lights my fire. Yeah. And surprisingly, they turn around and say, "Well, why can't we do both?" And that's how the kind of two programs, one community happened.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about it. I think it's and what's happening is that people are coming along to the MBSR, and they're hearing bits and pieces about the Dharma, and they're beginning to realise, well, actually, this isn't wacky religious stuff. And there is more to this business than just meditation. Yeah.
Yeah, we have found that the humanists and the atheists are quite open to secular Buddhism and very interested. And on the site, we did a poll asking what tradition folks had learned before they came to secular Buddhism. And I was surprised to discover that more than half of them said that they were completely new to Buddhism, that they didn't have a previous tradition. So that's really exciting to see, and I know a lot of them just happen to be atheists and humanists who want some kind of a practice, who need some kind of guidance through life, and secular Buddhism fits that really well for them.
What I found is interesting in a lot of the journals, and I see it quoted in this and a few of the others, that there's the Religious Landscape Survey, which shows the trends in various traditions and their growth and their decline. And it's interesting that in the Buddhist magazines they say Buddhism is the one that's growing most, except for this one other one, which is the nones, people who None, people who declare no religion, and they just sort of set that aside as if that's unimportant.
That's a huge important category.
And that's huge because for us, what Dana and I in particular hear because we're very familiar with this survey and its results from our interactions in the atheist community, is this is people who are willing now, as they have not been as much in the past, to openly declare, I don't have a belief in a traditional religious paradigm, and I'm willing to say that openly. So the biggest opportunity and the biggest growth is not with Buddhism. That comes under people who are not religious. And so a secular practice like ours and that kind of engagement, that's where the opportunity is. And as Dana is saying, we do find a great deal of interest from people in the secular humanist and in the atheist communities. I'd say in some cases more than in Buddhist communities.
Yeah, and I call myself non-religious. I mean, when I fill out those forms, that's what I put too. I don't check Buddhism because I label myself as an atheist who practices secular Buddhism, because to me it's very much a practice and a way of life. It's not a religion to me.
All right. Now, one of the things I think we should probably get to, because we haven't done that yet, is really the point of us having this conversation that we're in right now, is the new website. Anantacitta, tell us about how this came about and its evolution. I know you and Julian have been working on this with a number of other people. How did it all start?
Well, actually, it was Stephen who planted the seed.
Yeah, Bachelor, it's all his fault again, eh?
Yes, quite. enjoying a conversation that we had a few months ago. Um, Basically, I was saying that it is quite difficult to get people who come to these beginners meditation classes to sort of continue with the practice. And I think for me, I felt it was because although I was attempting to steer clear of a more traditional Buddhist approach, I also felt that people were looking for something, and it was trying to kind of find that balance to define what we were doing. And the same went for the continuation group, to sort of define what we were doing in a way that people would respond to. And this is out of that came a discussion about secular Buddhism and what secular Buddhism meant. And I felt very much that although my practice has been more traditional in the past, although with a Western voice, I was beginning to move away from that. And I definitely see myself now as a secular Buddhist, although I do label myself, unlike Nourie, I do label myself as a Buddhist. And actually I find people respond to that very well. I even call myself an Anantacitta at work. And I'm much to the amusement of people, they say, "What does that mean?" Yeah, that's a conversation we can have. Well, actually, and really, I think the site came out of that. This sort of need, I think, also for me, this need to have a community that I can be part of. One thing that the FWBO do very, very well is a community, and that is part of, I think, what I lost when I left. And I wanted to build a community of like-minded people, people who were practicing the Dharma, who felt that they were able to practice the Dharma in their own way, with their own direction, and just having a support network there. I think that's where it's really come out of.
Julian, tell us about your involvement with the creation of the site, how that came about for you.
Well, the first thing I must say is that really the work has been done by Anantacitta and along with a couple of other people in terms of actually building the site. I've been kind of participating on the sidelines. I'm very excited about what's going on. It's about community at the end of the day. But I've been so caught up with the local sitting group that we've got here, the Secular Sangha in Edinburgh, that I've been unable to contribute significantly to the national site. I'm hoping that will change as the weeks go by. But yeah, I mean, what struck me about what Anantacitta was saying just there about community is I think groups like the FWBO do community very well, but essentially they're still built on a similar kind of model to the other traditional religious organizations, hierarchies, institutions, and that brings with it weaknesses as well as strengths. And so I think one of the challenges for secular Buddhism is how do we find appropriate ways of building community in the 21st century that fits with modern Western liberal democracies, or not Western. I don't like that dichotomy between East and West. It's just modern societies. This applies to Japan as much as it does to the UK and America.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. I always use contemporary practice to keep that open door.
Sure. So that's one of the reasons that I'm really excited about the national site, is that it's got the potential to encourage people to set up little groups here and there, get people together, and maybe to start organising in a slightly different way. And I think this is coming out of the Secular Buddhist Association in America as well. We're seeing the same kinds of open communities developing, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity to tell the listeners the web address of the site we're talking about is secularbuddhism.co.uk. And when you go to that site, this is Secular Buddhism UK, and this is the subtitle of it, and the intent of it, from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing here, which I'm very encouraged by, is creating a UK secular Buddhist community. And we refer to this as the national site, but as Julian was just saying, on this, what we expect, and this is something Julian, you and I have been talking about for quite some time now, is that what we expect is with our particular approach to practice. And Anantacitta, you were referring to this in your own experience with some challenges by the hierarchical structures, that what we expect will happen is that various groups form to fill the needs of their local communities, and that we have these sites, the Secular Buddhist Association site, the Secular Buddhism UK site, and others, are resources for people to start their own in-person communities that are on a more local level. There's no interest. In fact, there's quite an aversion from everyone I've spoken with in the secular Buddhist community to creating any kind of hierarchy. We're just not interested in that.
Right. So we do want to point out, Ted, that in having these sites globally, it does create a global network, which in itself is a kind of community. It's just that we don't have a leader.
Yeah, precisely. And that's
right.
In keeping with traditional Buddhism. It's the Buddha ostensibly said, it's not me, it's the teaching. Don't follow me. Go to the teaching. This is your own practice you need to engage with. And we're taking that to heart. And I see that very much in this website. And I see that we are sharing resources. The guiding principles that are on the site are ones that are matched in what we have on the Secular Buddhist Association. And you also have, there's a very nice page you have on here called How This Site Works. And you talk about membership and what that means and blogging and so on. Anantacitta, would you tell us a little bit about that and how the site itself functions?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, a lot of people who visit the site are just going to be, as I put in the site, passers-by. So, they just sort of have a passing interest in the site and will kind of take what they want from the site and then probably take that no further. But I think, secondly, there are also maybe a group of people who are very interested in secular Buddhism and want to be part of a secular Buddhist community. And hopefully they'll be people who will contact us and become members. In fact, we've already got one member already who's seen the site and has joined us. It's very exciting. The site then gives access to members to the blog, where people can have discussions about secular Buddhism, what it means to them, what implication it has on our modern secular society. So we can have an ongoing discussion about that. Also, hopefully, local practice groups will also develop out of that, and it's a sort of resource for that, where people can make contact with other people in their area to form groups.
I think that a possibility of sharing resources is particularly exciting, actually, in Anantacitta, because I got involved in setting up this group in Edinburgh pretty much out of my experiences with the Humanist Society, and I didn't even find out about your site, Ted, until I started talking to Stephen, and then of course I found all these resources and thought, oh wow, I wish I'd known about this.
Well, it is fairly new.
Yeah. So I mean, it's great, and I mean that's wonderful that people can log on and see other people have set up groups, and not every group is going to follow exactly the same model, but you can kind of pick and choose bits and pieces, that suit the kinds of environment that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I know the answer to this question, to these two questions I'm going to ask you, Anantacitta, and the first is membership on the site, and your meditation trainings that you do, how much do those cost? This is a loaded question.
It is. And the answer is absolutely nothing whatsoever.
I love that answer. That's so nice.
Ditto.
Tell us about that, because you've gone ahead with the approach. And the reason I ask that is I know that is the case on membership with the site. We've done the same thing with the SBA site, and we'll continue with that in the organization. And I noticed you mentioned that in your own classes, is that if people want to contribute it to your efforts in the classes, of course they can do that, but there's no requirement, and nowhere on here are you asking people for donations.
No, absolutely. As far as the meditation classes are concerned, the gift of meditation was something that was given to me, and is something that I want to share with other people. I do ask people if they feel they're able to give a donation towards room hire, then people can feel free to do that. This also occurs with the regular groups as well now, because we've now moved from our house to the same center where I teach meditation. So yeah, I think it's very important to give people this gift, and to feel that you can give something to somebody, and I think it is a great gift to give to people.
Yeah, I do as well, and at some point I expect that on the SBA side or some others, we may have the ability for people to donate, but one of the things I would like to see is that they be towards very specific programs. For example, I get emails sometimes from folks who are saying, I want to start my own meetup group, but there's this upfront cost of, say, $75 to get it going, and I don't have that. What I would like to see is at some point we are able to set up funds for various programs like that we're able to provide the initial seed money for that kind of activity, or perhaps fund some education programs, or perhaps online 12-step support infrastructure, those kinds of things. So there are possibilities coming, but please understand, folks listening, going to the site and logging on as a member and creating that, it's not going to cost you anything, and there's only benefit to be had from that.
That's something that's very important to stress, I think, and it is a big question, I think, facing social organisation in general. Obviously, there are practicalities involved. You've got venue hire. There are actually costs involved, albeit relatively small ones in comparison to lots of ventures. So yeah, we ask for contributions, and I was going to ask your advice on this, guys, because the way we do it at the moment in Edinburgh is to suggest a donation, but make it clear that that's entirely voluntary, and if you don't have the money, you really mustn't pay. But at the moment we're anchoring it by saying, the suggested donation is, and so if you come along, it says the suggested donation is £5. But that's just so that people have got a rough idea of what's appropriate. But even doing that is potentially going to make people who can't afford to pay that feel like they're. So it's a difficult one.
Mm-hmm. It is, and that's the challenge I've also wrestled with, is how to provide some guidance for people who would like it, but not feel that you're disenfranchising folks who are in a place right now in their lives where they just can't manage it, and know that that's okay, and that is very difficult. Dana, what are some of your thoughts? What have you seen before, and how people have handled that?
Well, I'm in agreement with everything you guys have said, and I think that if you need to put a donate button on the site, that's fine. I would just not make it so up front and center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not about. That's one of the things that I'm particularly encouraged by with these grassroots efforts that we're seeing, is that there's no one involved here who's making a living from this. We don't have that kind of dependency on incoming funds, which means we have the freedom to not really be attached to needing to woo corporate benefactors or wealthy benefactors or groups that can financially help support us. We don't have any sort of need for that. And that's one of the advantages of the grassroots groups, is that the people that we count on to support us, we count on more their effort. And this is something that we are offering, and what people want to do to help support that is entirely up to them, and we can say that absolutely free and clear of any kind of attachment to what they're doing, because it's grassroots effort. It's what people want to put into it.
Yeah, and I think the idea of collecting money for a specific program is a good one. You know, as long as you can detail what the program is, what it's for, and then just do it for a temporary amount of time until there's enough money for that program. I think people are very receptive to that sort of thing. They want to know where their money's going, you know.
So taking a quick look at the site itself, you have some a very good community building things here, including a groups link, and under that you do have a couple of groups, the ones we've been talking about, listed. You have members, resources, meditation classes, retreats, a lot of really rich and very good information here. Anantacitta, what is the aspect of this site or page or offering that you're most encouraged by, most enthusiastic about?
Oh, that's a hard question.
I know, it's also good.
I obviously, as I'm sure you realise, we've been through quite a lot of sort of different looks of the site, not being quite happy with one and then trying something else. So it's been a bit of a trial and error, really. And I think the look of it, I'm now pleased with. I think it looks well.
It's a beautiful site. It really is.
Yeah.
It's simple but attractive, you know. I do like the about page. I think I'm very happy with that. I think it does say what it is. You know, it's to use that well-worn phrase, it's what it says on the can. Mm-hmm. So, you know, hopefully that's going to be sort of something that people will read and feel drawn towards.
That's what. In fact, I want to read one line from that particularly resonates with what we were just talking about. And it's in the second paragraph. Ultimately, it is hoped that this community will grow into a secular Buddhist peer practitioner-led movement that takes decisions affecting the members democratically, striving for consensus whenever possible. That says it so beautifully. Thank you so much for writing that and putting that in.
With Julian's contribution as well, I might add.
I love what Martine's written on the front page as well. Martine Batchelor. I think that captures again it keeps it very simple in talking about the essential components of practice in terms of meditation practice, in terms of concentration and inquiry, and also. But it paints the bigger picture about. It talks about ethics. It talks about compassion. It talks about engaging with life. Yeah, it's wonderful.
She does, and she acknowledges in there. Let me just read from that opening page. And this is from Martine. I would hope that secular Buddhist teachers and practitioners would see that human beings are multi-perspectival, similar and different from each other at the same time, and that no technique can fit everyone, nor all the time. So it's really an acknowledgement that we are individuals, and there's not a rubber stamp that we must fit into, but our own engagement with the practice is going to change over time, and it's going to look different. Some of us are going to light incense when we meditate. Others are going to be very interested in ethic social practice and engagement. Others are going to want to be focused on compassion practices. It's all a wonderfully rich and diverse way of engaging with moment-by-moment living. We've been talking about the wonderful site, Secular Buddhism UK, and that web address for folks listening is secularbuddhism, Our guests today have been Julian Adkins.
Thank you everyone, it's been great.
And Dana Nourie.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting to see secular Buddhism moving around the world.
And Anantacitta Tunnell.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Ted, for arranging this. It's been lovely to speak to you all.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.